In Sifu, the player acts as the protagonist who goes on a course of revenge for the death of their father. But as the playthrough reveals more information to the gamer, a course of complex and even vague details are interpreted by the gamer, which was intentional from the developers of the game. But the speculative scenario is this: what were the exact interpretations on philosophies for Wude? The method of fighting that the protagonist uses in the game wasn't technically referred to, but from dialogue mentioned by the player's father and Sean, the art was depicted as a variant of Wing Chun, with actual lore from the game calling it Pak Mei. The interpretations of Pak Mei can actually be determined by how the gamer used the protagonist during their playthrough of the game. The combat method has various techniques, but the particular aspects of how and even when to use the arts can be viewed if the gamer were to be more of an offensive or defensive player depending on their style, as there were different tiers of mastering the game's experience or even handling the particular methods of difficulty for the game itself. In the center of the protagonist's family home was the tree where the skills can be learned, upgraded, or eventually mastered. All different tiers of experience depending on the said capability of the gamer themselves. Depending on how the gamer handles the scenarios of combat in the game, it can be casual or more specialized in terms of techniques with relation to the abilities as well. Growth in understanding Pak Mei as the protagonist learns techniques from the playthrough, and the gamer learns what sort of attacks or abilities can better help them survive through the levels of the game and ultimately accomplish their main goal. It was actually mentioned through dialogue multiple times that Pak Mei can vary in terms of how effective it can be, and it was all based on how effective the protagonist was, acted out as the player during their gaming experience. This basically meant that Pak Mei was completely dependent on how skilled the gamer was when playing, on how technical they were when unlocking techniques, as this was the original concept for Pak Mei. However, the player base of the game was far more casual than developers had anticipated, and an easier difficulty was patched into the game after its release to help more simple players even complete the game itself. The theory of Pak Mei being viewed as a martial art that can vary depending on the skill of the user is actually mentioned multiple times in the club level where the protagonist goes against Sean and his disciples. The minions mention to the protagonist that fighting all depends on the fighter themselves, and Sean even mentioned that with the death of the protagonist's father, the school that they had come from has had its prestige diminished greatly since the era of the grandfather, then to the father, and finally to the protagonist, as it was up to the protagonist to either save the school or let it be destroyed. So the aspect of the gamer understanding Pak Mei originally was absolutely pivotal to playing the game correctly. Every martial art or method of combat has a system of ethics, in another interpretation as a code of conduct. The father of the protagonist mentioned this to the protagonist and always tells them to strive for more, or to always hold themselves properly in combat, to proclaim the standing of themselves and even the superiority or complexity of the martial art of Pak Mei. Even Wude is a Mandarin saying for quote-unquote martial morality in relation to martial arts for the experience of Sifu. Wude can even be applied to those responsible against the protagonist, depending if the gamer kills or spares them. From the action shown by the protagonist, they only showed malice against 2 of the 5 responsible for the death of their father. Fajar was the first. In the introduction of the game, Fajar was actually the one who technically killed the protagonist for the first time with his machete weapon. So when it came time for revenge, the protagonist didn't hesitate when doing the same thing to Fajar. But unlike the protagonist, Fajar wouldn't be able to revive after being killed. From the action shown by the protagonist, they only showed malice against 2 of the 5 responsible for the death of their father. Sean was the second. As in the introduction of the game, Sean was actually in command of the minions that attacked the protagonist's martial arts school. During the fight against the protagonist, Sean gloats about how their father was killed and how weak he was when in comparison to Yang. When the protagonist defeated Sean in battle, they killed him without hesitation. In the protagonist's desire for revenge, they encountered Kuroki, as she had nearly no connection to the death of the protagonist's father, but in the anger that was consuming the protagonist on their growing distance from the conduct or path of Wude, they fought against and later killed Kuroki without hesitation. Jin Fang was the wealthy businesswoman that, through circumstances not fully explained in the game, helped to fund Kuroki's museum exhibition on the Yang Sanctuary. She was the only female martial arts master depicted in the game, and partially due to that, she succumbed to corruption and greed. According to details mentioned in the game, her logistics helped Yang, Fajar, and Sean to attack the martial arts school of the protagonist's family. Even further, that Jin Feng was the main founder of Kuroki's exhibition, so she was responsible for forcing Kuroki to act as a promotion of her influence and reach as a businesswoman. As the protagonists ventured through the tower, it was learned that their father knew of great power from the amulet, but he refused to share this power with the greater people, instead keeping it with the other Grand Masters of the martial arts. Ignoring what their father did, along with the others, they killed Jin Fang. The protagonists became more and more obsessed with their revenge for the murder. Even after learning the truth about the talismans or even their role their father had with the amulet, as well as the secret knowledge with it, this did not matter at all. Straying further and further from the path of Wude, the protagonists then killed Yang, but the spirits were disappointed with their decision to kill Yang. As punishment for the reckless aspect of vengeance, the protagonist is forced to relive 8 years of their life by being sent back in time to before they went on their quest for vengeance. And it was hoped that this time they will learn to hold the principles of Wude when seeking Yang on the others responsible. From the auction shown by the protagonist, only 2 characters showed acknowledgement for being spared by the code of Wude. Fajar was the first. As when the protagonist spared Fajar, his expression of being allowed to live was something of sorrow and repentance for what they had done to the protagonist. From in-game lore, it was mentioned and depicted that Fajar was suffering from an undisclosed illness, and according to Yang's records, his treatment was proceeding nicely with proper medical attention. After the player spared Sean, he seemed almost surprised to be allowed to live by the protagonist. It was later mentioned that sparing Sean was one of the best examples of Wude, because no matter how vile an individual might be, giving them a second chance at life showed just how virtuous the person was for following the code of Wude. However, even then a person might not be worth the particular effort, as from in-game lore, it was hinted at Sean killed his own father, who was also a virtuous martial arts master, and corrupted the school of which he founded, and later Sean took forceful control over, perverting even the teachings of his father, calling it the burning. Sean using the fire for his own ambitions on twisted aspects of control. As a result of everything, it was unknown as to what Sean might have done, but it showed that Wude was a philosophy that couldn't or wouldn't help every martial artist. In the protagonist's desire for revenge, they encountered Kuroki, as she had nearly no connection to the death of the protagonist's father. From the auction shown by the protagonist, only 2 characters showed true acknowledgement from being spared by the code of Wude. Kuroki was the second, as when the protagonist spared Kuroki, her facial expressions showed sadness, and from the fact that her own situation was something that she couldn't escape from, and eventually come to understand it. From in-game lore, Kuroki actually grieved the loss of her twin sister who died through unknown circumstances. The entire meaning of the museum exhibit was of duality, on the theory that Kuroki took on the persona of her sister, Shirozu. Kuroki also controlled water, which was flowing everlasting, but also destructive. As a result of everything, it was unknown as to what Kuroki might have done, but it showed that Wude was a philosophy that couldn't or wouldn't help every martial artist. Using Wude on staying calm helped the protagonist to avoid killing an innocent person, but was unable to save them from their own grief. Jin Feng was the wealthy businesswoman that, through circumstances not fully explained in the game, helped to fund Kuroki's museum exhibition on Yang's sanctuary. She was the only female martial arts master, and partially due to that she succumbed to corruption and greed. As despite her corruption, she did a lot of charity work and was a well-respected businesswoman known internationally for her actions. Keeping in the philosophy of Wude, the protagonists learned that their father was at fault for keeping crucial knowledge of the amulet from everyone, as had been the custom of the grandmasters of the various schools of martial arts for centuries. Knowing that Jin Fang was partially correct with her claims against the protagonist's father, they let her live after defeating her in combat. Learning the truth about their father as well as the talismans, the protagonist journeys through the sanctuary, encountering people that Yang had actually helped on, people who had found peace through the relaxation or even healing methods of the sanctuary. The protagonist knows what Yang said is true, but Yang still feels hate within his heart due to the loss of those he had cared about. During the final battle, Yang was able to take away the amulet from the protagonist, but they heard whispers from their father on the spirits that the path of Wude is righteous and even death should not deter those who are just, as the protagonist died during the final confrontation against Yang. But after the death, Yang was surprised about what had occurred, later deciding to revive the protagonist, and Yang was finally able to grieve his loss and dedicate himself to helping others, and even himself. The protagonist, now fully understanding the way of Wude, eventually reopens the school devoted to Park Mei and becomes a well-respected Sifu in their own right. By default, the player experiences the revenge interpretation of the game. By doing this, in-game lore for the reasons why the others attack the protagonist's martial arts school are somewhat vague, as there is only the desire for revenge, no matter what else might be the consequence. Much like in actual methods or reflections of combat, it's easy to take revenge through further blood being spilled, but doing so means that more often than not, much more is lost when in comparison to the original action that led to the start of the revenge plot. It was mentioned many times in the game. Within the revenge playthrough, it was said that when will the pursuit of vengeance end? It more than likely wouldn't, as after Yang was killed, the protagonist felt nothing and gained nothing from the murders of all involved. The true ending helped the player learn the complexities of life that each martial artist endures on their own path. By doing this, in-game lore for the reasons why the others attacked the protagonist's martial arts school were explained, and since the protagonist remained calm and just, they learned that it wasn't entirely their fault. Some had remorse, some didn't even care, or even some wanted an escape. By dying and reviving, the protagonist learned that there is more to life and the righteous path is the only true path. They knew that the only way to save Yang was to die against him. That was the essence of Wude, and the protagonist was even temporarily in the afterlife and understood everything before being revived by Yang and devoting themselves to true peace and acceptance through Wude.